Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The cold steel of a jagged blade pressed against the hollow of his throat, drawing a singular crimson bead of blood before he could even gasp. Julian Vane froze, his breath hitching in his chest, his eyes adjusting to the heavy darkness of the bridal chamber. He had expected a corpse. He had expected a cripple. He had been told that his new husband, the Duke of the Northern Territories, was a man whose legs had been crushed in the war, a vegetative alpha rotting in his own estate. But the hand gripping Julian's jaw was ironclad in its strength, and the pheromones flooding the room weren't the scent of decay. They were the overwhelming, suffocating aroma of ozone and burnt cedar. This was the scent of a predator at the apex of its hunt. "You smell?" A deep, rough voice rasped directly against the shell of Julian's ear. Like a liar, the blade dug a millimeter deeper. "Tell me, little Omega?" The voice dropped to a terrifying growl. "Did my stepmother send you to finish the job, or did your father sell you by the pound to warm a dead man's bed?" Chapter 1. The Lamb with Wolf's Eyes. 3 days ago, Julian had been staring at the ceiling of a hospital room in 21st century Shanghai, a corporate strategist known as the Viper, who had finally succumbed to overwork. When he closed his eyes, he expected the void. Instead, he opened them to the sound of hysterical weeping and the suffocating grandeur of a Baroque bedroom. He had transmigrated. He was now Julian Vane, the illegitimate 19-year-old Omega son of the Vane family, a clan of high-ranking aristocrats teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. And the weeping came from Adrian, his half-brother, the pampered, legitimate Omega. "I won't go. I won't," Adrian shrieked, throwing a porcelain vase at the wall. "They say Duke Cassius is a monster. They say his legs are twisted, his face is ruined, and he kills his bedwarmers in fits of rage. Father, you can't make me." Lord Vane rubbed his temples, looking aged and desperate. The marriage alliance with the Draven family was the only thing that could save them. The Dravens needed a high-status Omega to produce an heir for their dying duke, and in exchange, the Vane debts would be erased. Julian, sitting quietly in the corner of the room, felt the memories of the original body flood his mind. This Julian was weak, timid, and abused. He had been starved of affection and treated as a servant. But the soul inhabiting him now was different. The Viper saw an opportunity where the boy saw terror. The Vane household was a sinking ship. If Julian stayed, he would be sold off eventually, likely to someone far worse and with less money than the Draven Duchy. "I'll go," Julian said. The room went silent. Adrian stopped crying, his tear-stained face looking up in shock. Lord Vane frowned. "You, Adrian is your prized jewel," Julian said, his voice smooth, lacking the stutter the original owner possessed. "If he goes and is killed, you lose your leverage. If I go, well, I'm expendable, aren't I?" He stood up, the unfamiliar Omega biology making him feel physically lighter, more fragile, but his eyes were sharp. "Send me. Tell the Duke's estate that Adrian fell ill with a contagion. By the time they realize the switch, the contract will be signed." Lord Vane looked at his illegitimate son with new scrutiny. He didn't see the fear he was used to. He saw a cold calculation that unsettled him. "Fine," the patriarch spat. "Pack your things. But if you die, don't expect us to retrieve the body." Chapter 2. The Ironridge estate. The carriage ride to the Northern Territories took 2 days. As the landscape shifted from the lush, green valleys of the capital to the jagged, gray peaks of Ironridge, the temperature plummeted. The Draven estate was less a home and more a fortress. Black stone cut into the side of a cliff, perpetually shrouded in mist. When Julian stepped out of the car, shivering in his thin ceremonial white suit, no one greeted him with flowers. A line of servants in drab gray uniforms bowed stiffly. At the end of the hall sat a man in a wheelchair, Cassius Draven. Even seated, he was massive. A blanket covered his legs entirely. His face was partially obscured by the shadows of the high hall, but Julian could see the sharp jawline covered in rough stubble and eyes that glowed with a feral amber luminescence. There were scars, one running from his temple down to his cheekbone, but he wasn't the monster the rumors described. He was terrifyingly handsome, in a way that suggested violence. "Lord Vane," the steward announced nervously. Cassius didn't speak. He just stared. Julian felt the weight of the Alpha's gaze. It was a physical pressure, a distinct biological reaction known as the command. It was meant to make Omegas kneel. Julian gritted his teeth, digging his fingernails into his palms. In his past life, he had stared down boardroom sharks and mafia dons. He would not kneel to biology. He remained standing, lifting his chin. A flicker of surprise passed through Cassius's amber eyes. "Take him to the bridal suite," Cassius said. His voice was like grinding stones. "Wash the scent of the capital off him. He smells like perfume and lies." Chapter 3. The poison chalice that night led to the knife at his throat. Julian, pinned against the silk sheets by the man who was supposed to be paralyzed, didn't beg. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but his mind was ice. "If I were an assassin," Julian whispered, the blade still pressing against his skin, "I would have used the wine." Cassius paused. The feral growl in his chest subsided slightly, replaced by suspicion. "The wine. The Pinot Noir on the nightstand," Julian said, his eyes locking with the Alpha's. "It has a faint scent of almond. Cyanide masks well in red wine, but not well enough for someone with a sensitive nose. I didn't drink it, and I didn't offer it to you." Cassius narrowed his eyes. He slowly pulled the knife back, though he didn't release his grip on Julian's neck. He sat up, straddling Julian's waist. His legs, supposedly useless, were clearly functional, thick with muscle that gripped Julian's hips. "You noticed." It wasn't a question. "I have a background in herbalism," Julian lied smoothly. "I know what poison smells like." Cassius reached for the glass of wine, sniffed it once, and then hurled it against the far wall. The glass shattered, the red liquid staining the expensive wallpaper like blood. "My aunt," Cassius muttered, a dark smirk twisting his lips. "She gets impatient." He looked back down at Julian. The moonlight filtered through the heavy curtains, illuminating Julian's pale skin and the dark bruise forming on his jaw. "Why are you here, Julian Vane? You aren't the brother promised to me. The report said Adrian was a spoiled brat. You are something else." "I wanted to survive," Julian admitted. "My family is a pit of vipers. I figured the monster of the north might be a safer bet than my own father." Cassius laughed, a low, humorless sound. "You traded a pit of vipers for a wolf's den. Do you think you're safer here?" "You didn't kill me yet," Julian pointed out. "And you can walk, which means you're playing a game." "I'm good at games, Cassius. I can help you." Cassius leaned down, his nose brushing against the scent gland on Julian's neck. Julian shuddered involuntarily. The alpha pheromones were intoxicating, demanding submission, but Julian fought to keep his mind clear. "You have 1 week," Cassius whispered against his skin. "Prove your worth. If I find you useless or treacherous, I will break you myself." Chapter 4. The game of shadows, the marriage was a sham, and the household was a battlefield. Julian quickly realized that Cassius's disability wasn't entirely faked. While his legs worked, using them caused him immense agony. A curse, or rather a neurotoxin from an old war wound, was eating away at his nervous system. Using his alpha energy accelerated the decay. He used the wheelchair to conserve strength and to lull his enemies into a false sense of security. For the next 5 days, Julian didn't act like a wife. He acted like a logistics manager. He overhauled the kitchen staff, firing 3 maids who were stealing funds. He reorganized the estate's ledger, finding the holes where Cassius's aunt, Lady Alara, was siphoning money to fund a private militia. But his biggest project was Cassius himself. On the 5th night, Julian entered the study without knocking. Cassius was at his desk, sweating profusely, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair until the wood creaked. His face was pale, veins bulging black against his neck. The toxin was flaring up. "Get out," Cassius snarled, his voice weak. "Drink this," Julian said, placing a steaming bowl on the desk. "I told you, I don't take unauthorized medicine. It's not medicine. It's a neutralizing agent. I raided your library's restricted section on botany. You've been treating the symptoms with painkillers, which actually thicken the blood and spread the toxin faster." Julian pushed the bowl forward. "This is a mixture of fireroot and nightshade. In small doses, it paralyzes the toxin, not the nerves." Cassius looked at the bowl, then at Julian. The Omega looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his fingers were stained with plant juices. He didn't look like a scheming spy. He looked like a frantic partner. Cassius drank it. Within minutes, the black veins receded. The agony that had been a constant companion for 3 years dulled to a manageable ache. Cassius took a deep breath, the first painless breath he could remember. He looked at Julian, his gaze complex. "Who taught you this?" "I read a lot," Julian deflected. "And I have a vested interest in keeping my husband alive. If you die, your aunt will likely toss me off the parapet." Cassius reached out, his large hand capturing Julian's wrist. He pulled him closer. The wheelchair barrier felt non-existent. "You're dangerous, Julian," Cassius murmured. "An Omega with a brain like a tactician. Why did your father hide you?" "Because he's a fool," Julian said softly. "He is," Cassius agreed. He ran his thumb over the pulse point of Julian's wrist. "You're staying in my room from now on. The guest wing isn't safe." "Is your room safe?" Julian challenged, arching a brow. Cassius's eyes darkened, the amber glow returning, hot and possessive. "No. But at least the danger there will be the kind you might enjoy." Chapter 5. The hunt. Weeks passed. The dynamic shifted. It wasn't romance yet. It was a high-stakes partnership laced with suffocating tension. Julian was the shield, managing the house and the politics. Cassius was the sword waiting to strike. But the secrets couldn't last forever. The annual winter solstice ball was mandatory for all high nobility. It was held at the royal palace. Cassius had to attend to maintain his status, and Julian had to attend as his consort. It was a trap. They both knew it. "Stay close to me," Cassius ordered as they entered the grand ballroom. He was in his wheelchair, dressed in a black military dress uniform, medals gleaming. Julian walked beside him, stunning in a deep emerald suit that accentuated his slender frame and fair skin. Whispers followed them. "That's the bastard son? He looks regal. Look at the Duke. He looks half dead." Halfway through the night, Julian was cornered. It wasn't by an enemy, but by his past. "Julian." He turned to see Adrian and Lord Vane. Adrian looked envious. He saw the emerald suit, the jewels at Julian's throat, gifts from Cassius, and the way the other nobles looked at him with intrigue. "You stole my life," Adrian hissed, grabbing Julian's arm. "Look at you parading around. That cripple was supposed to be mine." "You didn't want him," Julian said coldly, pulling his arm away. "I didn't know he was rich enough to buy you this," Adrian sneered. "Father wants you to come home. We're annulling the marriage. I'm taking my place. You think Cassius is a toy you can pass around? He's a cripple." Lord Vane stepped in, his voice low and threatening. "He has no say. I am your patriarch. You will." Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom flickered and died. A chaotic scream erupted from the crowd. Assassins. 3 men dropped from the skylight, dressed in stealth gear, moving straight for the wheelchair. "Cassius!" Julian screamed. He didn't think. The reflex of his past life kicked in. He grabbed a silver serving tray from a passing waiter and hurled it with terrifying accuracy. The heavy silver edge struck the first assassin in the temple, knocking him off course. Julian threw himself in front of Cassius just as a second assassin lunged with a dagger. Slish! The blade sliced through Julian's shoulder. Pain, hot and blinding, seared through him. He fell back, landing in Cassius's lap. Julian! Cassius's roar shook the very foundations of the hall. The sight of Julian's blood triggered something primal. The restraint Cassius had been exercising for years evaporated. The cripple of Iron Ridge stood up. The ballroom went silent, save for the gasps of the crowd. Cassius rose to his full height, towering over 6 feet, radiating an alpha pressure so intense that weaker men in the room fell to their knees, vomiting from the sheer biological dominance. He didn't need a weapon. He grabbed the assassin who had cut Julian by the throat, lifting him one-handed off the ground. With a sickening crunch, he crushed the man's windpipe and tossed the body aside like a rag doll. The third assassin froze, terror in his eyes. Monster. Cassius stepped forward, his eyes glowing like molten gold. You touched what is mine. He moved with a speed that blurred the vision. In seconds, the threat was neutralized. The Vane family stood paralyzed, Adrian trembling violently as he looked at the cripple, who was now a god of war. Cassius turned, ignoring the terrified court, and scooped Julian up into his arms. Don't close your eyes, Cassius commanded, his voice shaking with a rage and fear Julian had never heard. Julian, look at me. I'm okay, Julian wheezed, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Just a scratch. The suit is ruined, though. I'll buy you 1,000 suits, Cassius growled, holding him tight against his chest. I'll burn the world down if you die. Chapter 6. The consumption back at the estate. The doctors were dismissed. Julian refused them, instructing Cassius on how to stitch the wound himself. He didn't want strangers touching him. They were in the bedroom. The air was thick with the scent of blood, antiseptic, and aroused pheromones. The near-death experience had stripped away the last of their pretenses. Cassius finished bandaging the wound. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling. He looked at Julian, sweaty, pale, hair plastered to his forehead, and he looked like a man starving. You stood up, Julian whispered. The secret is out. I don't care, Cassius said. I saw you bleed. Nothing else mattered. Your aunt will know. My father will know. Let them come, Cassius said. He leaned in, his lips brushing against Julian's unharmed shoulder. I was hiding to find the rats. But the wolf is done hiding. He moved up, capturing Julian's lips in a kiss that wasn't gentle. It was possessive, desperate, and wild. It was acclaiming. Julian gasped, opening to him, wrapping his good arm around Cassius's neck. You are mine, Cassius growled against his mouth. Not a proxy. Not a replacement. You, Julian. He pushed Julian back onto the pillows, his weight heavy and comforting. I never wanted to be saved, Cassius admitted, his voice raw. I wanted to die in this house. Then you walked in with your lies and your almond-scented wine and your eyes that look like they've seen war. We're both broken, Julian whispered, running his hand through Cassius's dark hair. Then we fit, Cassius said. He grabbed Julian's waist, his grip bruising, pulling him flush against his body. The wildness in him was uncaged now. There were no more wheelchairs, no more masquerades. Just the alpha and his omega. I'm going to destroy your family for what they did to you, Cassius promised, biting gently at the sensitivity of Julian's neck. But first, I'm going to make sure you never forget who you belong to. As the candles flickered out, Julian smiled into the darkness. He had played the game of survival and won the grandest prize of all. The viper had tamed the wolf, and in doing so, he had found a home in the jaws of the beast. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing the tables turn and Cassius finally losing control, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. Would you forgive a family that sold you to a monster, or would you let your husband destroy them? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.